Hello, welcome back to the next episode of the Narconon and Scientology Chronicles. This is Lucas Catton, and for this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about a failed expansion campaign from Narconon Arrowhead at the end of 2003 and 2004. And what was happening at the time was there was a lot of growth. It went from 100 to 160 patients, clients, students, whatever you want to call them, within 2 years. So it was growing quickly. They moved to Arrowhead in the summer of 2001. So 2 years later, they went from 99 students, as they called them, to 160 and kept growing. They had gotten up to 250 at one point. So it continued to grow up until 2005 and then started to shrink after that. But during this time, there was an idea among the senior executives, Gary Smith in particular, and Michael Goslin. They were the executive director and the deputy executive director, and they wanted to, they wanted to implement a few things and build onto the campus. Now, Narconon Arrowhead is 250 acres or something like that, with 55 cabins and 70,000 square foot facility, and it's on the lake, things like that. So there's already a lot of space there, but they wanted to add on. They wanted to add on a few different buildings for a few different reasons. One of them, notably, and why I'm going to call this video, their attempt at instituting an RPF. And the RPF is a Rehabilitation Project Force, which is something from the Sea Org for the Church of Scientology to rehabilitate staff who are in trouble. And rehabilitate is really a misnomer because it's punishment, and it's a re-education program, encampment, where people are unable to talk to each other and things like that until they finally break down and agree to follow the rules. Well, as Narconon Arrowhead was growing, they had a real difficult time keeping people. And in this briefing that they had put together, at one point, they had suspended 36% of their enrollments. So that means they were actively having to push people away because they couldn't control them. More than a third of them, 36%, were being suspended or otherwise being pushed away. That doesn't include those who left on their own, who were who either blew, means that they just left, or they routed out because they didn't want to stay, meaning they, signed paperwork to leave on their own accord. Those are in addition to that, because at one point they were over 50%, or under 50% in terms of retention rate. Over 50% of the people were leaving who initially showed up. So per this, they had 36% of the people that they were suspending, and they had implemented something called an ethics course room, where they would take students and put them into study L. Ron Hubbard's ethics technology very intensely, and away from the other classrooms, course rooms that they had for other stuff. And so they said by doing this, they were able to do it. First, they took Narconon Arrowhead staff and sent them to Church of Scientology to train as something called an ethics specialist. They went to Kansas City at the time, to the Church of Scientology in Kansas City. And then they came back and then they implemented this ethics course room. And what they demonstrated was that by giving special focus to these people and taking these students into a separate part and focusing on the ethics portion of things and giving them more personalized attention, that they were able to retain more of them, and less were either suspended or kicked out or left or whatever. And that was saving them money, and they wanted to be able to retain, obviously, as much money as possible. So, of course, common sense is that if you give people who are having a hard time more specialized attention, then, yeah, the likelihood of them staying is better. Narconon is set up in a very large classroom or course room. They claimed that it was all, sort of a 1-to-1 staff to student ratio. Yeah, but that was like all staff, not direct working with the students. And I keep saying students because that's what they called them, not patients, not clients. They called them students. So the actual people in a course room, for example, where they were studying the L. Ron Hubbard material in the course room, there would be like 2 people in there out of 30 people in there. So it was more like a regular classroom type thing. And so there wasn't a lot of personalized interaction from that standpoint. They would go about it in different ways. So they thought that if they built a whole other building called the Personal Integrity Center, it was also affectionately known as the Ethics Camp, and it was taking, and in the meetings they were talking about it, it's like a mini RPF. So in the senior, amongst the senior executives there, in something called the Executive Council we met every Thursday afternoon, after all of our weekly statistics were gathered. Scientology does that Thursday at 2. Hubbard made that up for whatever reason. So that afternoon we would always meet, Thursday afternoon. And so for months we would talk about this ethics camp coming and how they would joke that it was a mini RPF. And in the workups, like in the drawings and stuff, they'd actually said, it'll be 4 people to a room in bunk beds. It'll be Spartan furniture. It'll be, more like a dorm style thing and less like a private rehabilitation center. So they were taking them out of their nice rooms, putting them in crappier rooms, and then giving them hardened. They would do something called MEST cycles. So now everyone who got put on quote unquote ethics cycles would have to do MEST work. MEST is a word that Hubbard created. That's an acronym for matter, energy, space, and time. So it's like doing manual labor of some type or doing physical work of some type. So they'd be put on MEST work. They would be having to study Hubbard ethics material in much more detail, and then put in rooms that weren't nearly as nice in an attempt to save them from leaving or having to be suspended and then put them back into like general population. So the Narconon RPF never made the light of day. They continued to do their little ethics cycles and that kind of stuff and put people on MEST work and, who did things from, start have some kind of physical relationship with another client because it was co-ed or, other things. Usually they would get suspended if they, brought drugs in or were fighting or, some people were just non-compliant in general and things like that. So the Narconon RPF, though, the ethics camp, the Personal Integrity Center never came about, thankfully, because it was really a terrible idea. And in addition to that, they also wanted to build a medical detox facility on site, which goes against Narconon's ideology altogether. But what was happening is that people require medical detox for different drugs they're withdrawing from and certain levels of alcohol, etc. So we would always have to refer them out to local medical detox centers before they could come in to stabilize people before they could do a drug-free withdrawal. Well, usually when they got to these medical detox facilities, the staff at the facilities would be like, wait, you're going to Narconon? Don't you want to go to a real treatment center? And they would actually talk them out of it. So a lot of times what would happen is people would hold their breath to see whether or not the person who says they were coming and then has to go to medical detox actually arrives, because around 50% of them would never actually get to Arrowhead. They would wind up going somewhere else, or they would detox and then decide they didn't want treatment and they'd go back home or wherever they went. So that was another huge thing that they were losing money for. So they wanted to build a medical detox facility on site and get it licensed. Down the road, they wound up buying a facility in McAllister, about 25 miles away, because they couldn't get these plans approved through the landlord, which is ABLE, Association for Better Living and Education, and the Social Betterment Properties Corporation that actually owned the Narconon Arrowhead land and the building and facility. So they couldn't get all this stuff approved. So they wound up purchasing a facility in McAllister, a different old hotel that they did some partial renovations for, and became a quasi-training center medical detox that they wound up opening as a medical detox. They got provisional licensure from the state of Oklahoma. However, the state of Oklahoma eventually pulled their license and shut down their medical detox facility in McAllister. Imagine that, because they weren't doing things properly. How about that? So their attempt at a medical detox facility failed. They also wanted to build an international training center because Arrowhead was supposed to be the international training center. And there was a lot of complaints amongst staff because whenever there were people who came in from Narconon centers in different parts of the country or around the world to come in and do some things there, that it was a nuisance, or that it was difficult having to deal with them. And the fact is, most people who wanted to open a Narconon didn't come to Arrowhead anyways. That was just this pipe dream that they had. But they wanted to build a whole new international training center as well. And there was all these drawings that made up. They wanted to build a new estates or maintenance facility. They wanted to add on a new drug-free withdrawal facility on top of the existing withdrawal wing that they had. And so they wanted to expand from what was essentially 250 beds to, let's see, including like 30 beds for the ethics camp, another 40 beds at medical detox, and like another, 40 beds in the drug-free withdrawal area. So they wanted to add on like another 110 beds to an already 250 bed facility where they were already admittedly kicking out more than a third of the people who showed up. So these expansion plans, again, they fell through. Narconon, as I mentioned at the beginning, Arrowhead did continue to grow until about 2005, 2006, where they hit their peak around 250 students at one time in-house. They were getting anywhere from 20 to 30 people a month coming in and generating anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 per week. Many weeks they were doing well over $250,000 in a single week. So they were cranking out a lot of money. They were doing $1 million a month, and now if you look up their 990 forms, their IRS 990 forms online, I think they did 1.8 million last year or something like that. So they're about 12% of what they used to be. And whether or not they're trying to make a comeback, I don't know. And as I mentioned in my last video, I got word that some other centers are closing down. Arrowhead is still hanging in there because it's owned by Able. So, the church owns the property anyways, and they're, whether or not they're paying themselves rent is somewhat irrelevant. It would be such a smudge on their face if they had to permanently close Arrowhead. So they're hanging on by the skin of their teeth there. But the Narconon RPF, the ethics camp that thankfully never was, that's the little inside story there. And today, actually, another former Arrowhead employee had contacted me yesterday and had asked questions about some of the old executives that were there and if I'd been in touch with them. And actually, I have a bunch of people that I'm in touch with now who used to work there who are no longer part of anything and thankfully have escaped and gone on to live their lives and everything's fine. And this person had asked about them, and I said, I think actually all the old executives are gone. That anybody who was there back in the heyday has either just left, walked away, gone on to do something else, retired, passed away, whatever the thing is. But whatever was of that old time period is no longer. And there's a ton of details from there that that'll come out in some of these stories and things like that. And we've written about it, and people like Ortega have shared a bunch, and plenty of other things. We did the rock centerpieces. There's a bunch of investigations. I found some old information on some of those investigations and stuff too. So, some of this stuff is still valid because these places are still in existence. And so that's part of the reason why I'm doing this, is sharing some of the things that people don't know of. And thankfully for shows like, Scientology in the Aftermath with Leah Remini and Mike Rinder. And now that it's on Netflix, all the episodes that were on A&E, those 3 seasons, now that they're on Netflix, is fantastic, so that people are becoming more aware of all of the stuff associated with Scientology. And, having done the episode with them on their Fair Game podcast and talking about Narconon, again, being able to shed more light on it. And this is just a continuation of that. So if any of this made any sense, great. If maybe I can, somehow get some of these things up to be able to share it. But there you go. That's the end of this story and this episode of the Narconon Scientology Chronicles. I hope you're well. Take care.